In 79 AD, a 19-year-old Dean girl called Sabina stood bound in complete darkness beneath Rome's loudest arena. 50,000 Romans yelled in joy above her, supporting the gladiator who had just killed her brothers. What transpired over the course of the following 3 hours turned into one of Rome's most brazen cover-ups. Even Rome's own historians disagreed about whether or not to discuss this heinous practice. Roman senators attempted to erase this narrative from history. The prize that made a winner capable of practically anything behind closed gates. If you've ever wondered what truly happened after the crowd left, click the like button before we discuss what transpired in those underground rooms. You won't be able to view ancient Rome the same way after hearing this, so subscribe. Leave a comment below. Was this just the harsh price of empire, or did Roman entertainment go too far? The information you are going to hear is directly from Cassius Dio's testimonies, supported by Senate records discovered in the Vatican archive and validated by 2018 excavations beneath the Colosseum. This is not a myth. The reality behind the arena of blood throughout the empire in the 1st century AD was what Rome referred to as sport. The Colosseum was more than a structure. It served as Rome's emblem of supremacy. Finished in 80 AD, just a year earlier, it was big enough to engulf whole armies. Metal, perspiration, and animal odor are constant in the air. Sand was not used to decorate the arena floor. It was there to absorb whatever spilt from wild animals and dead combatants. Rome's most expensive possessions were kept in a network of tunnels and cages beneath that sand. The conquered, the captured, and the sentenced. There was more to gladiator contests than just amusement. They were a combination of social intimidation, religious rites, and political propaganda. In addition to gold, General Marcus Antonius brought back 847 prisoners, including 124 noblewomen, after putting an end to the Dean Rebellion in 78 AD. These were not your typical villagers. They were warriors, spouses, priestesses, daughters, and chieftains. Rome did more than simply subjugate its citizens. It had to degrade them to such an extent that they would never rebel again. The condemned and the victor now faced each other. Gas by Roman standards, 32-year-old Valerius Maximus was enormous, standing close to 6 feet tall. His whole body was a violent map. Every wound from a battle won, a life lost, and a crowd ecstatic. After his father passed away in debt prison, he was born into slavery and had to battle for his life for 14 cruel years. In official battle, he had killed 89 men. It was an easy dream for him. Get the rudies, the wooden sword of freedom. His greatest dread was being hauled away on meat hooks like hundreds of others and dying anonymously. However, he overcame the Dean champion in front of Emperor Titus this afternoon in August 79 AD. His prize was given in accordance with customary procedure. 500 denarii, a laurel wreath, and the first pick of the female captives. In a holding cell with 17 other women, Sabina stood with her pale skin and dark Highland hair. She was engaged to a warrior named Decebalus, who had been slain by Roman soldiers 3 months prior, before Rome set fire to her hamlet. With her world gone and her future obliterated, she now waited in quiet. Her only desires were death and dignity. She was most afraid of becoming amusement for the audience that had applauded the annihilation of her people. She was told by a guard that morning that she had been selected for the event that afternoon. She was still unsure of what that meant. She was going to discover that Rome's cruelty was not quite as terrifying as its kindness. This has nothing to do with specific lives. It had to do with psychological warfare. Rome understood that physical conquest was insufficient in order to achieve true dominance. A people's symbols had to be broken, their customs had to be corrupted, and it had to be demonstrated that even the most protected parts of their society, their women, now belonged to Rome. This was not random violence. The message of targeted dehumanization was disseminated throughout all occupied areas. It is useless to oppose Rome. Rome is unbeatable. The events of that day would become so well known that the Senate would soon have to take action. The Master of Games entered the hypogee, the subterranean complex beneath the Colosseum, at precisely 3:00 p.m. as darkness began to descend over the blood-stained stadium. The hallway smelt of fear and wet stone. He brought a bronze tablet with a list of the spoils that were available to Gaius Valerius Maximus. Gaius's hands continued to tremble from the fight, and his adrenaline continued to burn. The official said, "The emperor honors your victory. According to imperial custom, you are entitled to the prizes of victory. Make a decision." Nobody present anticipated that this ordinary decision, which had been made hundreds of times before, would cause a crisis that would reach the Senate floor in a matter of weeks. The awards were listed on the tablet: gold, wine, a night in a nice bed, or Victoria Carnales, the winner's sexual privilege. This was one of the rare occasions he had any authority at all for a man who had nothing and may be killed at any time. Not only did Roman society accept this, but it even rejoiced in it. Rome believed that the purpose of the vanquished was to appease the conqueror. That was the logic of the empire, refined over many centuries. The planning started. Another type of preparation was already taking place within the women's detention facility. In order to wash the inmates, guards entered with buckets of water. The women's torn clothing was replaced with simple tunics, their hair was combed out, and they were cleaned. Sabina observed the attendants scrutinizing each woman and recording information on wax tablets as they went from one to the next. The truth that everyone feared was told by an elderly woman, a priestess named Zmaxis, who had formerly been loyal to the Dion Sun Temple. "They are preparing us for the performance or for what will happen next." The preparations rapidly came to an end, but something much worse was being put up somewhere else in the arena. Something that would transform an ordinary act of exploitation into a scandal that would be discussed for ages by future historians. For the afternoon's secondary entertainment, 50,000 people crowded the seats above them. In between big gladiator bouts, arena organizers produced what they called interludes, choreographed fights, pretend hunts, and what Roman writers kindly referred to as legendary reenactments, which frequently required condemned captives to repeat legends that resulted in actual deaths. But there was a fresh element to today's exhibition, a show honoring Ron's victory over barbaric humiliation. The arena makes a call. The subterranean lift system carried 20 Dean women to the arena. An engineering configuration intended to launch props, fighters, and animals out of trapdoors. Sabina emerged into intense heat and a cacophonous clamor. The crowd's shout was like a physical blow. She detected the iron stench of dried blood baking on the sand beneath the heavy perfume wafting from affluent seats and the roasting food from cellars. What ought to have been a simple execution was transformed into something designed to cause more humiliation. As a herald proclaimed the women's alleged crimes, rebellion, assisting foes, and rejecting Roman gods, they were arranged in a queue. The twist then appeared. They would be made to fight in pairs with wooden swords while wearing ripped clothes meant to make fun of them. Rome's champions would claim the winners. The losers would perish. If you find this degree of deliberate brutality shocking, hit the like button, since what follows demonstrates that this wasn't anarchy. It was a policy. The tipping point. They distributed wooden swords. The rough wood scraped Sabina's palm as she gripped hers. Camacicus, Dialus's sister, who once taught Livia how to weave and sing at her engagement ceremony, was standing across from her. Their gazes met. The audience cried out for blood. The game master held out his hand. Dropped it. The two women did not move. The scream changed from enthusiasm to bewilderment to fury. "Fight!" shouted the audience. Barbarians, cowards, and rubbish started to pour down. Food scraps, olive pits, and whatever else that onlookers might reach. The women did not raise their swords. It was their sole remaining form of resistance. Rejection. Two unarmed ladies stood motionless for 90 seconds, publicly defying the world's biggest power. The guards then barged in. The theatrical drama gave way to actual bloodshed. The flat of a sword struck Camacicus from behind, causing him to fall to the beach. The audience applauded. With a scream, Sabina charged towards her, dropping the wooden sword. Instead of being put to death, both were hauled away to something equally amusing for the spectators. The hypogem below is where the true horror starts. Roman exploitation's bureaucratic engine continued to run relentlessly. A note was added to the record by a scribe. 20 female prisoners for post-victory allocation. The Dean origin was processed. Next line. Two resistants were moved to private rooms for the champion's sole usage. What followed was the most sophisticated system of dehumanization in Rome. People are reduced to inventory. Camacicus and Sabina were transferred to separate rooms. Little stone rooms with benches, doors that only lock from the outside, and iron rings set into the walls. Because everything was planned, they were spotless, well-organized, and intimidating. This was not spontaneous brutality. Similar to the gladiator lifts and lion cages, these rooms were purposefully included in the arena's construction. Gaius Valerius Maximus came into Sabina's room at Ford. When the door opened, their gazes locked. He was still fully outfitted for the arena. His chest was covered in someone else's blood. Drained and unarmed, she was pressed up against the distant wall. The entire weight of Roman law rested between them. He possessed total legal authority. She didn't have any. She was categorized as a spoil reward obtained by murder. History doesn't reveal Gaius's thoughts. Was there anyone he saw? Did he see any property? Did he question the system that made him a prisoner and a weapon? The only information we have is from a routine report from a clerk. Not from either of them. Then the unthinkable occurred. A rebellion. Gaius removed his helmet, put down his sword, and took a seat with his head in his hands. He remained silent for 5 long minutes. Sabina stayed motionless, anticipating violence that never materialized. At last, he spoke in broken Dion, a language he had learnt from other prisoners. What was his name? He inquired. Mine, she answered at an O. You were forced to see the man's death. Decebalus. The one from today, that is. She gave a headshake. He let out a sigh. Today I killed a Dalis. It might be relatives. That name is frequently used by your people. Rome wasn't prepared for the attack that came next. It was a dialogue between two individuals. The empire attempted to eradicate all traces of humanity. Gaius told her about his father, who was put to death when he was 9. Sabina described how her house caught fire. 2 hours went by. After doing 2 checks and listening to voices, the guards assumed compliance and continued. Gaius Valerius Maximus made the choice that Rome would never forgive him, for at 6:00 p.m. he got up, went to the door of the chamber, and summoned the guard. This woman is ill, he said. Contaminated. I send her to the doctor and deny the allotment. The arena system only permitted this one loophole. A gladiator had the right to reject a prisoner and put her back in ordinary prisoner status if she was declared ill. The deception was clear. Although Roman bureaucracy operated on strict protocol, the guard recognized it right away. It required documentation, witnesses, and an investigation to contest a gladiator's decision. It took a few seconds to accept the rejection. Sabina was then hauled away and placed in the medical holding area, where she would soon meet her demise. The most frequent cause of death in Roman captivity, a simple infection, claimed her life 3 days later. The medical unit was dirty, overcrowded, and uncaring. Quintus Aurelius Semicus, a senator, presented a formal grievance to the Senate. His trainer had thrashed his young nephew, a junior gladiator, for not accepting the traditional prize after winning. The nephew said he was motivated by Maximus's example. The trainer maintained that he was only upholding appropriate Roman norms. With one exception, the case was insignificant and hardly worth talking about. It made the most prominent men in Rome publicly admit to a practice that everyone was aware of but never discussed. The sanitized copies of Senate documents that have survived discuss a disagreement about the propriety of specific traditions pertaining to defeated female prisoners. A 4-hour political dispute about whether Rome had finally crossed a limit that even its own senators couldn't ignore was hidden by that gentle statement. Senator Fabius's conservative bloc invoked custom. Holy body and spirit were subdued by our forebears. Shattered our magnificence. More pragmatic resisted the reformist faction's stoic impact. We are producing martyrs. Rebellion is what we are sowing. The dead rebels had vanished. However, the memories of traumatized survivors serve as fuel for decades of revolutions. However, morality wasn't the real catalyst. It was a matter of political survival. Rome's treatment of captive women was cited by 3 regional governors as propaganda for resistance movements in their reports of recent uprisings, Rome was no longer threatening its adversaries, these rulers warned. They were becoming radicalized by it. The empire was hurting itself. Rome was astonished by the law. The Statute of Captive Women, known to historians as the Lex Captivity, was passed by the Senate on October 1, 79 AD. Although its terms were short, they were unheard of. In the arena, female POWs could not be given out as public prizes. It was forbidden to publicly humiliate captured women in official settings. Private exploitation persisted, but it was forbidden to display it in a theatrical setting. Enforcement was unreliable. Although many arena managers disregarded it or made exceptions, the idea persisted. Rome had public boundaries as well. Ironically, no one was set free by the statute. The audience was the only thing eliminated. 3 months later, Gaius Valerius Maximus was granted freedom, not because he was kind, but rather because he had won 5 more fights in a row. Purchasing the release of a Dean woman named Camascus was his final documented act as a free man. Only her name is identified in the archives. She may have been the same woman who stood next to Sabina on the arena floor, according to historians. Imagine Gaius discovering that one woman was spared for a few days by his one act of rebellion. Nothing more. For the thousands who came before and the thousands who will come after, it made no difference. It only removed the audience. 3 months later, Gaius Valerius Maximus finally earned freedom, not for kindness, but for winning 5 more consecutive bouts. The last recorded act as a free man was purchasing the freedom of a Dean woman named Camascus. The archives identify only her name. Historians strongly suspect she was the same woman who stood beside Sabina on the arena floor. Imagine Gaius realizing that his single act of defiance saved one woman for a handful of days. Nothing more. Changed nothing for the thousands who came before the thousands who would come. The machine was too big, too profitable, too embedded in Roman culture. His rebellion was a raindrop falling into an ocean of blood. Imagine Sabina's final hours dying from a preventable infection surrounded by other prisoners the empire didn't even bother to document. Not one senator debated her death. Her name was not mentioned by any historian. Her suffering was not significant enough to be recorded in Rome's moral calculus. Rome's cruelty isn't the only tragedy. Ancient warfare was characterized by cruelty. The real tragedy is that Rome standardized everything with paperwork, supply lines, and architectural planning, industrialized it, and turned it into entertainment. A system so comprehensive that individuals vanished within it, leaving only scratches on stone as evidence. A forgotten portion of the Eastern Hypergym was unearthed in 2018 by archaeologists from the University of Rome under the direction of Dr. Isabella Fortunato. Tourist brochures never featured what they discovered: a collection of little rooms with iron restraints built right into the walls. Stone flooring have drainage channels carved onto them. Marks made by desperate hands, bits of pottery that have been compacted by years of weight and used to move food or water. The chambers were from the initial 80 building, which means they were purposefully constructed and not added later, according to carbon dating. 6 bronze tags bearing the term Captiva and dates from 79-82 AD, the precise years of the Dion suppression, were found. These results were consistent with the textual evidence. Later texts by Cassius Dio detailed the distribution cells for women who had been subjugated. Seneca mentioned the practice in passing in her earlier correspondence. Normally graphic, Tacitus was noticeably silent, suggesting that even he found it too disgusting to express clearly. The frequency is debated by historians. Some contend that it was uncommon and only applied to significant victories. Others claim it was routine, citing the specialized construction, copious proof, and numerous sources. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It's not constant, but it's frequent enough to account for when building infrastructure. Gladiators were treated by the Romans like historical superstars, but with a sinister twist. To meet them, elite women bought off guards. Wall paintings and engraved lamps depict gladiators brandishing weapons while nude. They sold their blood and perspiration as aphrodisiacs. It was even consumed by some women as a fertility remedy. These men were fed into death machines and rewarded with human beings by the same society that worshipped them. According to historical records, gladiators and slaves interacted with affluent spectators during nighttime festivities following large games. Before being used as presents, captive women were paraded as prizes and occasionally made to perform tales involving gods like Jupiter or Mars. During triumphal parades, prisoners are made to undress. Before being executed, victims were chained to stakes to mimic myths. Before being turned over to generals, enemy queens paraded in public. It wasn't an accident. It was a global message. Your past, present, and future belong to Rome. Gladiator games weren't made at random. They belonged to the Muna. Obligations to the general population. There were incentives for patrons who organized games to enhance spectacle. Captives' humiliation turned into a selling point. Theodore Mson, a historian from the 19th century, referred to this as Rome's most effective dehumanization machine. His meaning was plain. Rome conquered more than just bodies. Identity, memory, and meaning were all subjugated. The extent of the wounds is demonstrated by the fact that we are still debating these incidents today. This reality was barely mentioned in the 2000 movie Gladiator, which only hinted to it in passing. Furthermore, contemporary academics continue to debate whether talking about these practices appropriately exposes Roman violence or just runs the risk of sensationalizing it. However, it is significant because it demonstrates how a society may use laws, norms, and entertainment to justify brutality. Rome was not the only empire capable of executing horrible deeds, but it was the most adept at normalizing them, turning screams into show, and turning violence into ritual. This is the more profound reality. The distinction between civilization and barbarism has never been determined by marble temples, paved roads, or tall arches. Rather, it has always been determined by how a society handles its most vulnerable members. Rome created aqueducts that lasted for 2,000 years, but it also constructed rooms beneath its stadiums where people were treated with the same contempt as stage props. Its moral emptiness and brilliance coexisted peacefully. It also shows how power warps everyone it comes into contact with. Gas was a tool as well as a victim. Controlled, enslaved, and compelled to murder in order to survive, yet given power over someone much more defenseless than himself. Instead of inspiring pity and admiration, the system twisted common people into tools of cruelty and turned human misery into entertainment. It alerts us to the peril of applying tradition as a moral defense. Our forefathers did. It became Rome's solution to every moral dilemma until cruelty became the norm and habit took the place of humanity. It also brings up issues that we continue to face today. Beneath the monuments we admire, are there any other hidden horrors? How many tourist destinations are built on top of layers of forgotten suffering? When is it vital to face the past? And at what point does it become exploitative? Imagine Sabina's last moments, as she perished from an infection in a little cell beneath the biggest building of her era. Did she question whether anyone would remember her? Did she have any idea that 2,000 years later, researchers may discover her tag and call her name once more? The saddest tales in history serve as a reminder that progress is not assured, that moral collapse occurs long before physical collapse, and that each generation must choose between efficiency and empathy. Rome opted for spectacle. The lesson lives on in the ruins beneath the arena floor, but the cost was counted in lives lost. Thus, the triumph of a gladiator became an excuse for brutality. One of Rome's most meticulously concealed scandals was a normal prize. One young woman named Sabina escaped only because one warrior made an odd decision, while hundreds of Dion captives vanished into bureaucratic lists. A decision that had no effect other than demonstrating that humanity could survive even amid Rome's most sinister apparatus. Subscribe if this story made you uncomfortable, because unsettling realities are far more important than consoling falsehoods. What worried you the most, Rome's skill at making the exploitation commonplace or its deliberate nature? Let us know in the comments. Recall that the finest monuments of civilization frequently conceal the darkest mysteries of history. Not all of the blood on the sand came from combat. Sometimes it resulted from innocence being transformed into a spectacle, from unbridled power, or from the periods when evil was applauded while mankind turned a blind eye.